followed me from Ash Hollow with no exit. I noticed it in the rearview mirror the night I drove away from Ash Hollow. A hesitation in the glass, a shape that didn't belong to the road. At first, I named it memory, smoke, heat, the ash on the air, like a promise that everything could be wiped clean. But the shape sat at the edge of my vision, as if comfortable there, patient. By the time the highway swallowed the town's last sign, I had the odd, absurd conviction that something had crawled into my day. It didn't arrive with a voice. It arrived with misplacements. My old house key turned up threaded through the useless zipper of a jacket I hadn't worn in years. The key was warm as if it had been in a pocket recently, but the jacket smelled of other rooms, closed wardrobes, and a steadier, colder air than my apartment. I told myself I'd been careless, sentimental, that leaving gives you room to forget how sticky memory can be. The key, however, remained stubbornly specific. The apartment I moved into was small, sensible, chosen, because its landlord kept the rent kind, and the windows let in honest light. There was a mirror above the sink, with a thin hairline crack that looked like the trace of something other than wear. Sometimes the crack caught the afternoon and suggested a second window into a room I didn't recognize. I'd blink and the room would be empty. The feeling that the apartment contained two tempos, mine and something that waited, began to unknot my patience. Small calamities began to gather weight. A photograph I'd sworn I'd left in Ash Hollow appeared taped behind the mirror. A Polaroid of a charred street where the lamplights had shadows that didn't align with their poles. Faces in the photograph were smudged, as if someone had tried to wipe them out. When I touched the paper, the obvious burn marks flaked like dry ash. There wasn't logic to these returns, only the sharpness of an answer I hadn't asked for. I tried to treat everything as coincidence. Coffee spilled, a door jammed, a delivery left on the wrong stoop, mundane errors that could be explained by distraction. But the ash smell persisted, a dry, metallic tang that had no business in a city apartment. It came in at the seams like tidewater. People told me I looked tired, but they meant the trenches under my eyes. What I couldn't say out loud was the forgetting that felt deliberate, as if some patient intelligence was folding time like paper and pressing down creases. Sleep offered no refuge. In dreams, I drove back through blackened streets to a house that had been mine and wasn't. The presence was at the window, a silhouette that slid between the burnt beams and the living room light. When I woke, the scarf, threadbare and smelling like forests after a slow burn, was folded on the radiator, where I didn't remember leaving it. Waking and remembering became a test I kept failing, and the presence kept keeping its distance with deliberate care. I stopped telling friends everything. Words gave the presence too much structure. When I said, "I think something followed me," it sounded like a joke. In their faces, I saw the circled concern and the urge to reassure. Reassurances slid off. At night, the streetlight hummed a little louder, and in that frequency, the presence seemed to pause, listening, counting. My solitude grew like an animal in the corners of the apartment, patient and watchful, then curious as to whether curiosity was the same thing as hunger. I tried ritual. I lined the hallway with found objects coins, a folded map, a shallow bowl of salt that did nothing but look earnest. The presence rearranged nothing, but shifted the space between objects so that their shadows merged into a single, wrong shape. Once, when I left for groceries, I found the map placed over the driver's seat of my car, as if someone had traced a path out and then stopped short. It was always a little too precise to be purely random. The city offered its anonymity, but anonymity was not the answer. The presence disobeyed distance. It showed up on evenings when I felt bravest, when I forced myself into cafes and tried to read, manifesting as an unexpected chill only I seemed to feel. Sometimes baristas would glance at me like people who know a friend's grief. Sometimes they would smile and hand me the wrong change. Such small mistakes felt like accents, the presence experimenting with speech. The more I cataloged incidents, the less I trusted memory itself. I started carrying the old key like a talisman, clicking it between my fingers to feel proof of continuity. The key sometimes hummed against my palm with the peculiar intimacy of something that remembered another rhythm. Once, the crack in the mirror seemed to widen when my fingers closed around the brass, and for a second the reflection showed me an empty room, the presence standing where I should have been. It was a substitution, so gentle it felt surgical. On a rain-heavy night, I drove back toward Ash Hollow, driven by a mix of anger and hope that confronting the source would end the trailing. The roads were more honest in the wet. They reflected headlights, as if both lanes wanted the same direction. As I neared the town's turnoff, the ash scent swelled until the car interior was full of it. I slowed because the presence prefers, of course, to be allowed its moments. There is a politeness to its stalking that felt almost civil. Ash Hollow was quieter than memory and louder in the ways that matter. Doors were shut, windows boarded in polite, dust-dusted slats. The photograph street, now under a different sky, did not welcome me with answers. The presence let me walk the blocks, as if testing a script I hadn't been given. It supported nothing like terror. It wanted instead the slow arithmetic of attention. When I reached the house with the rusting porch, I realized the presence had been teaching me how to notice, and I resented its pedagogy. Inside the house, the air tasted like yesterday that refused to go away. I moved through rooms cataloging what remained: a chair with a singed armrest, a shelf with a book's spine weeping soot. The presence sat in the shadow where the living room met the hallway, patient as a guest who had been given a seat for years. It did not speak, but it arranged silence as if composing music. All I could think was that leaving had made me careless with a door I never properly closed. When it finally moved toward me, it did so like a thought completes itself, unhurried but inevitable. It traced a slow arc around my shoulders, as if recalibrating the outline of who I was. There was no violence in the gesture, only a laying down of something else's claim. I realized then that it had not followed me to punish. It had followed to be near something it recognized. Recognition is not always kindness. The presence wanted to be near what it knew, me, and the precise combination of forgetting and insistence I brought wherever I went. I had the foolish hope that I could bargain with small domesticities. Keep the mirror empty, never leave the key unattended, sleep under lights. But the presence is not a negotiator of trivialities. It rerouted my days by making some small truths impossible. Faces would blur at exactly the moment I tried to remember names. Songs would lose a verse I knew by heart. The pressure was not physical. It was the slow erosion of the scaffolding I used to make meaning of my life. I was being taught to exist differently. In the last room, the presence let me set a final test. Stay and listen to what it taught, or leave and keep the old grammar of my life. It arranged the options like objects on a table and sat back to see which I would touch first. There was no ultimatum, only the polite waiting of something that understands habit. Outside, the world continued with its small, ordinary cruelties. Inside, a different cruelty was patience. The choice felt too simple and too infinite to resolve. I walked out without deciding. The house didn't require a door to hold its meaning. The presence kept its seat as if it expected me to return. On the drive back, the ash scent was there but lighter, as if the road had diluted it with other miles. In my purse, the key was warmer than I remembered. When I checked the mirror that evening, the crack was unchanged, and yet somewhere behind it something shifted, as if rearranging a room I only half knew. The presence traveled light and stayed heavy. Now the question followed me more insistently than the presence. Who, exactly, had been following whom? I caught myself practicing new sentences in grocery lines, saying I left, and I came back in different orders to see which felt truer. Some nights, I imagined the presence as companion rather than predator. Some mornings, it feels like a sobriety I did not ask for. The last line is not a resolution. There is no neat exit. The presence has neither keys nor cruelty, only a patient interest in the way I learned to be less sure.